So every once in a while, the point of this channel is just for me to ramble about random different basketball things, and that's what we're going to do today. Hello everybody, welcome to Ausrosy Bucket. Subscribe to the channel if you have not already and drop a like on this video. It only takes 1 second and makes a massive difference in how the video performs in the YouTube algorithm. So there are really 3 things that I want to cover in this video. The first one being something that is just entirely not really a thing, but nevertheless something that I would like to speak into existence. You know, oftentimes I'm trying to communicate information to different NBA fans, but sometimes I'm just on here to be an NBA fan myself. So I want to talk about what I guess you could describe as NBA fan fiction, specifically for the Indiana Pacers. And that, of course, as you can tell from the thumbnail, is I think it would just be the coolest thing in the whole wide world if Paul George returned to the Indiana Pacers in this upcoming offseason. If you are not aware, the contract that Paul George has with the Clippers is a team option going into this next year. And I imagine just like any superstar or at least star tier player in the NBA, when they have, more years to go, I imagine he will decline that option and explore his options in general in free agency. Same thing can be applied to Kawhi Leonard. Same thing can be applied to James Harden, actually. So a lot of this would hinge, of course, on the success of this Los Angeles Clippers team, which, by the way, probably a team I need to talk about again, because since the initial disaster that team was, they've actually looked pretty freaking good lately. I believe they went on a 5-game win streak, and James Harden's playing good defense and fitting in a lot better. So as a whole, the Clippers do look better. That said, I don't expect them to win the title this year. While I do think they have a good shot at it, as good as anyone could have that's not the Nuggets really, I'm still not betting on that. And I imagine after years and years of trying and failing with the Clippers, that Paul and Kawhi, in their older, getting towards mid-30s age, they will potentially explore other options. Now, why the Indiana Pacers? Well, obviously, there's just the nostalgia factor of having Paul back in that uniform. I think it's always cool when a player who's kind of iconic within a franchise that leaves returns to that franchise, especially if it's more than just a symbolic gesture. It's cool that I guess Chauncey Billups retired a Detroit Piston or whatever, but Allen Iverson retired a Sixer. But I think it's a lot cooler when they actually play for that team again and for a long stretch of time. Not that there's all that many examples of it. Obviously, the most key one is LeBron James, and this would not be a return on that level, to be sure, but one that would make for probably my favorite basketball team in the entire NBA, being that the Chicago Bulls stand where they do, although they have also been good lately. The Indiana Pacers plus Paul George is something that I would just find extremely entertaining. And, with a couple of other moves made, I do think they could genuinely be a contender caliber team. Now, as for how Indiana does this, luckily they do have a decent amount of cap space going into this next offseason. However, in order to make all of that space, they would have to either trade a couple of players, potentially in a sign and trade with the Clippers, which they'd definitely be interested in something like that, as Paul George leaving is probably a sign that the team as a whole is blowing up, so they'd want to get what assets they can. So you can do it that way, or you could potentially hold on to a lot of those smaller contract players and just simply decline the team option for Bruce Brown. That would be a little bit sad of a loss, but of course you're willing to lose Bruce Brown in exchange for Paul George. And then Paul would immediately bring a defensive edge to this team. He would also provide probably better secondary playmaking than anybody else on the team can, outside of Andrew Nembhard, although he can't really play alongside Tyrese too much, nor do I think he's quality enough to be a 30+ minute per game player in a rotation in the playoffs. So you get the secondary playmaking. Obviously, Paul George is probably the best 6'9" or taller 3-point shooter of all time. So he's an excellent catch and shoot option, secondary shot creation, maybe even primary shot creation at times. And I think he would just fit right in with what Indiana does. Paul George is the type of player that fits in any context, really, but I especially like the fit in Indiana. And then he can bring more to the defensive side of the floor. I imagine probably in the best interest of the Pacers to get some other type of strong defensive player in there along with Miles Turner. Although I do feel like Miles Turner has regressed a little bit defensively, I also feel as though Indiana's scheme has not necessarily put him in the best situations to succeed defensively. But either way, like Paul George, Miles Turner returning, playing together again, and then some other defender, whether it's Jarris Walker, whoever it may be. I think at that point you can talk about being a very positive defense while being still the best offense in the NBA that if anything has more dynamic, I have no idea how to say that word, more dynamic offense in general. The criticism that I would levy towards Tyrese Halliburton at this stage in his career is that it's awesome that he is dictating the offense and carrying it to the degree that he is, and having such a strong influence on the playmaking with the team. But you guys, if you've been around, know my gripe with the concept of a traditional point guard, or rather just any individual player dictating a team's offense to that degree, especially in the playmaking department. So I like the idea that Paul George could come in there and add that extra dynamic to the offense, be a legitimate, clear second option, maybe even first again, because Tyrese's scoring isn't as outlandish as his playmaking is. But one way or the other, I really like that fit, and I really hope it happens. I understand if Paul George would want to go to a team where a title contention is more of a guarantee than just a possibility, but I think it'd be really cool. It's also worth mentioning Tyrese and Paul have a really good rapport whenever Tyrese is on Paul's podcast, and I feel like he's had Tyrese on his podcast more than anybody else. They seem to be good friends. I really like the idea. I hope it happens. That team would just be so freaking fun. Anyway, with that said, there's two more things I want to talk about. The first, the Chicago Bulls proposed a Zach LaVine for Darius Garland trade. I'm not going to talk about any of these things as extensively as I did that Paul George thing, but I just want to say this front office is on crack. How do you even think to propose that? That is frankly such a stupid trade proposal. It should just automatically get the jobs rescinded of everybody in that front office. I already don't like that front office as it is, but if you're gonna say some stupid shit like this, that's a great way to hurt your relationship with NBA teams, because that's the type of offer that I would straight up be insulted by if I was the Cleveland Cavaliers. Especially given that they have Donovan Mitchell, and especially how I feel about shooting guards, and I feel like the rest of the league feels about shooting guards. Are you out of your fucking mind that you would trade for another shooting guard who's not a great playmaker? Donovan Mitchell's a better playmaker than Zach LaVine is for sure, however, just not a primary initiator in that sense. Darius Garland very much is that, so you'd be removing that dynamic from the table, not to mention Zach LaVine historically has a connection to the Lakers and just playing in LA in general. I'm truly perplexed that this was even something that they had the gall to propose. Today is December 15th, so there's a pretty decent likelihood that we will actually be getting a trade involving Zach LaVine. Maybe not today, maybe in the next couple of days, but I can tell you this, it's not going to be for Darius fucking Garland, because that is a hilarious misunderstanding of trade value. Anyways, the other thing I want to talk about, just to end this off here, is Lauri Markkanen and his potential of being traded, and more specifically, a couple of teams that could trade for him. There are three teams that immediately come to mind for me. I think there's another one in the mix there. I think Sacramento. So it's Sacramento, OKC, and Miami. I feel like there's another team that could trade for him that I'm not thinking about right now. But Miami is one that I think really should do it, especially given how much they have missed out on. And I also want to say this before I get into those teams even. Lauri Markkanen is really fucking good. Really good. I think he's a top 20 player in the NBA and pretty freaking underrated at that. I understand the Utah Jazz have not been super successful. However, I think he is the perfect type of player to play with a really talented guard, or at least a really talented playmaking team in general. And he doesn't really have have that in Utah. Like Chris Dunn is trying his best, Keontae George is trying his best, but it's not quite the same as like having SGA as your guard, or having, and the other team that was interested was the Atlanta Hawks having Trae Young. And I don't really judge an offensive big man and his lack of team success if it's pretty much just him. You know what I mean? Like, I think an offensive big man necessitates that, you know, environment that sets them up properly. It's why I'm not really judgmental at all of Victor Wembanyama's rookie season, because they have done a horrible job of putting the pieces around him to actually elevate his game and allow him to succeed in the way that he's supposed to succeed. The same kind of logic goes over to Lauri Markkanen. But unlike Victor Wembanyama, Lauri Markkanen remains remarkably efficient. He is shooting nearly 40% from three on 9 attempts per game, which, by the way, just want to put this out there. Markkanen is easily on pace to become the best three-point shooting big man of all time. Like, I know there's been that discussion about Dirk and Karl Anthony Towns, but in reality, Cat only really had like that one stretch where his three-point shooting numbers were ridiculous. But Lauri Markkanen, straight up over the last 2 seasons with Utah, has shot the three ball better than any 7-foot tall player ever has. So with that said, it's a very valuable player to have, not to mention his overall offensive skill set being one that plays very well in a modern offense. He's really good at attacking off of the dribble, doesn't take too many mid-range shots, and when he does, they tend to go in. Pretty strong finisher, really capable ball handler as a big man, and a good decision maker. Not necessarily like some dynamic passer, but not a player who typically makes too many mistakes with the ball. Really can be a 3-level scorer and fits in the flow of basically any NBA offense, regardless of how you utilize him. So teams should be interested, and teams should be willing to give up quite a bit. I think there's a good chance that whatever trade goes down, there's going to be people, I guess this kind of always goes down, but when the trade goes through, there's going to be people saying it was too much. I'm willing to wager that that will not be the case. So the teams, as I mentioned on the table, the Kings, the Hawks, the Heat, and the Thunder. Those are the main teams that are in play in my mind. There's been rumors specifically about OKC and Sacramento more so than anybody else. In the case of Sacramento, I would be more interested in trading for a defensive player. Lauri Markkanen's not like a disaster defensively or anything like that, but he's definitely not the big positive that I think they should be looking for. So if I was Sacramento, I'd probably be looking in a different direction, especially because you might have to give up Keegan Murray in that deal. And from what I understand, especially what Alex Hoops has told me, Keegan Murray has been kick-ass this year. So I don't know if I would do that if I were them. But Atlanta is a cool idea for Atlanta. I don't want to see it happen, but I understand why they would be interested. I'm not sure what exactly that trade package looks like. I hope it's not Onyeka Okongwu, because Lord knows that he does not need to be on a team with another really talented center. Someone actually let him be the starting center, please. Ideally, this move for Atlanta would actually get rid of Clint Capella in the same process if they did go for that, in which case I would be much more interested, because I'm both getting Lauri Markkanen in Atlanta, but also getting Onyeka Okongwu finally as an actual starting center in the NBA, which he's been ready to do for quite a while. But Miami and OKC are the most interesting ones. Obviously the ones that have the biggest chance of actually just shattering the perception of the league in general, just changing everything. And Lauri to OKC is fucking terrifying, man, like truly. Like Lauri and Chet as your backcourt or front court, I always forget which is which. The backcourt's the guards, the front court is the bigs and the wings, right? Yes. But Lauri and Chet is so good, and then you have Shea and J-Dub, who's been improving as the year has gone along. Freaking Lou Dort has been an awesome role player this year. We're not going to talk about the other guy, although I will say the other guy, Lord knows, it would be very ironic if Utah traded for him in this deal. Just a certain history regarding that type of behavior associated with Utah. Anyways, OKC. Don't let OKC get Lauri. Because if OKC gets Lauri, not only do I think they're a contender this year, I think they're a contender for quite a while to come. And OKC is already stacked enough as it is. Getting true truly, like I genuinely believe, like if not a top 20 player, a top 25 player in the NBA that fits perfectly on that team, offense would get even more ridiculous. They'd also have 2 7-footers on the floor. So I think size wise, if anything, that was an area they were a little bit lacking outside of Chet, especially because Chet's a little bit skinny. So that would bolster their size, their rebounding would improve. The offense would be like, how that's such a ridiculous amount of spacing to have to worry about, both big men being such really talented 3-point shooters. Yeah, that would be scary. For Miami, extra dynamic to your offense, 3-point shooting, which is nice, more capable creation. Just more offensive threats is what's necessary for this team. And Jaime Jaquez might have to be in the move. Maybe not. I don't know how it would be structured, especially because he's been really good this year. But one way or the other, that would also be huge. Miami is a team that I'm refusing to count out until it really is just like very obviously over. And to this point, it's not very obviously over. So I'm going to keep being a little bit worried about them, especially if they added a player as good as Lauri Markkanen. But yeah, this video ran a little bit long, but that is it. Shout out to Rudy for editing this video, and goodbye.